Yeah, my name is Ron Gelderman. I'm the Soils Extension Specialist at SDSU. Like I've been telling people, I've been there forever, but at least Fred Schubeck is here and it makes me feel young. So he's been here longer than I. So yeah, what we've got here is a manure study, and you better give me one of those handouts too. So I know what's going on. But this manure study now is in its 11th year. And you'll see that MAN, that means a manure treatment. And you'll see that on the sign. And there's a high fertility treatment, a manure N treatment. I'll explain what these mean, a manure P, and a recommended fertilizer treatment based on soil test and yield goal. The high fertility treatment there is really putting a lot on, and what we wanted to do is see if the manure treatments were usually higher than a recommended fertilizer rate, and we suspect it was due mainly to N, and that's why we put the high fertilizer treatment on about 6 years ago to see if nitrogen was what was limiting yields with the recommended fertilizer rate, at least in some years. But and then we've got the P manure treatment. That's usually a lower rate of manure just to meet the phosphorus requirements of the crop, and so that's typically a lower rate. The manure nitrogen treatment, that's a rate to meet the nitrogen needs, and the nitrogen needs of a crop is higher than the phosphorus needs, so that's a higher rate of manure to meet the available N that plant needs. And then we got double that rate, double the 2N, just to see what even a higher rate would do. And so this has been going, like I said, this is the 11th year now that we've applied manure, and it's a corn soybean rotation. It's a tilled. We apply the manure in the fall, and then we work it in. Then we do another tillage operation in the spring. We put our fertilizer treatments on in the spring, just before the tillage operation. That's typically what a producer would do. And it's beef manure. It's off the feeding apron, and sometimes it's fresh, sometimes it's piled up, and then we utilize it. And we weigh it out and actually spread it by hand, so we're pretty sure it's fairly uniformly spread, and that was a concern of ours as well. But you can see differences there, and you can even see some of that manure, I think. And I should explain, the flags designate the borders of the plot. And the check, which gets no fertilizer, no manure, is right next to that high manure treatment. And you can see some of that manure creeping over, probably because of tillage in that treatment. And so there are quite some differences here. This is typically what we see most years with these variations in treatment. And we'll get to the yields here in a little bit. But one of our goals was to determine the influence of the manure, different manure rates, on not only yields, but what happened to soil fertility tests, and what Eric Barsness will be talking about in a little bit, what happens to soil quality parameters. And now after this many years, those things, you can look at those and see how they've changed. But yeah, the third slide there talks about the treatments that I've just explained. And again, the manure P treatment is usually the lower one. And then that table on the right side there in the middle looks at the tons of manure we've applied to date, and what that meant for the pounds of nutrients as far as N, P, and K. And of course, the fertilized treatment, no manure was applied, 534 pounds of N, and phosphate, 272 pounds. And of course, we don't fertilize the soybeans, and it's soybeans every other year, so just the corn treatment gets the fertilized treatment. But the manure treatments, we do fertilize both soybean and corn, just because some producers need to use those acres to spread, and so they're using soybeans to spread some of those that manure. But the manure P over that 11-year period had 44 tons, the manure N 110 tons, and the manure 2N, of course, double that, 220 tons per acre over that time. And you can see the nutrients that were applied over that time quite high with the 2N rate. And then as you look at what happened to the soil test, that's in that table on the lower left. And you could see organic matter there, and Eric will be talking a little more about that, has increased with increased manure rates, as we would expect. But Eric will talk more about that. And the nitrate, of course, this was taken last fall after the severe drought we had, and this was soybean last year, made about only 5 to 10 bushel. But we had a lot of carryover. Even the fertilized had 90 pounds of N. The soybean just didn't utilize much of that N that even was carried over from the year before. And of course, with the manure treatments, even more carryover, as we would expect. Some of that mineralized and broke down, and nothing there to use it. Sulfate, of course, increases with manure application as we would expect, as does phosphorus. We do have a limitation on how much we can apply on these CAFO regulations, and you get up to 100 part per million, and that's about all we can apply. But you can see at the higher rates, we are over that level. And K, of course, increases with increased manure application, and pH actually increased a little with manure. And my first thought was that would decrease as you apply fertilizer, urea, ammoniacal nitrogen, pH decreases, as you can see there with the fertilized treatment compared to the check 6.8, the pH to 6.3 on the fertilized, but then with the manure actually went up to 7. And so that surprised me a little bit, but some of these organic acids probably are taking up some of that acidity, and so we don't see the decrease in pH. Salts are increasing a little bit with the higher manure rates, and maybe this 2N treatment would start to lower yields somewhat. And there, the last chart there are the yields, and I summarize those as both corn, soybean yields, just added them up and divided by either 10 years or 6 years. So what you see there is both corn and soybean together. And you can see the check is quite a bit lower, as you would expect, than the fertilized treatments, and a little increase with the manure N. The 2N treatment here has decreased yields. That has not been the case at the similar study that we have at Brookings. There, the N and 2N were about the same, but here the 2N never looks quite as good. And maybe it's the salts, but it started out that way, really. So I don't think that's the case. But and the average for 6 years I put in there because that's when we put that high fertilized treatment in, and that looks pretty good, almost as good as the N treatment. But again, I think a lot of the years you see a higher yield with the manure, and part of that is due just to lack N with the recommended fertilizer. We always make our yield goal, which is 170 bushels with that treatment. But some years we have such good moisture and rainfall that we actually do better with the manure treatments, and it can actually make use of that additional N, which the manure can supply, or that high fertility treatment can supply. So that's all I've got. I'll turn it over to Eric right now and go from there.